All right, good morning, church. Hey, no shocker, I want you to grab your Bibles. I want you to open up to Ruth chapter 3. Here we are making our way through this incredible story, true story, great story, love story, whatever you want to call that. I'll remind you as we dive into this, remind you what I've said the last 2 weeks. This is our story, is what we really see here. It's awesome. We got a lot to cover in a short amount of time, and I would say an interesting, twisty kind of a time we have here. The story is going to get good, and it's going to get juicy here if you've never been through Ruth. Let's start here in verse 1, chapter 3 of Ruth. Let's pick up with where we left off. It says this in verse 1, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, All that you say I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, Who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And he said, May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, Let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, Bring the garment you were wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And she went into the city. When she had came to her mother-in-law, she said, How did you fare, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, These 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. She replied, Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. Here's what we're going to do this morning, and I would encourage you to do this, as we look through narratives like we are on Wednesday night with Daniel, as we look through stories like this, true stories in Ruth. I think there's 2 things that we need to do, and it's what I want to accomplish in our short time this morning. First, I just want to unpack what we read. While I think that we're smart and we can kind of get the gist of what just occurred here, it's weird. That's what I want to say about chapter 3. It's weird. It's odd. It's interesting. And I want to unpack all that's happened because I want us to set our feet in the text, like I said last week. I want us to put our feet in the context of what was happening in this story because I think it matters. I think it's important. I think it'll help us flesh out what we just read and what was going on. And for the second thing I want us to do after we unpack it is I want us to be able to apply it. And I think in the middle of unpacking what just happened here in the context of this story, we're going to see some principles that really run through all of Ruth in the Old Testament. And it will help us understand what do we do today in 2021 with a story like this. Why would God give us this? Why would he bring these people to do these very things and give it to us as his word? Because he believes, just like we read in 2 Timothy, that this word is useful today. Useful for correction, useful for training in righteousness, even this bizarre, weird story. So I want to take the first part of our time and just kind of unpack what we read in case you've never read through this. And maybe you didn't understand all of what was happening here. And let me tell you how I unpack this. I start to understand that we're dealing with a story that is, in a lot of ways, a love story. It's unique. And by the time we get to chapter 3, we see the part of the love story where the odd couple, extreme odd couple, are finding their moments to meet and become a couple. Couldn't help but think about how I became a couple with my wife. I think it'll help us. I started thinking about that story. It was kind of an odd story. I think about the very first moments where we went from being just acquaintances, me and Emily, my wife, and where we became kind of a couple. And honestly, I started thinking about that story this morning. I think there's parts of this story that maybe Emily has not even heard. So this will be interesting that she's going to hear it for the first time in a sermon on Sunday morning. But here, I started thinking about the very first time me and Emily, we started college together at Louisiana State University, and we knew each other. We both served at a ministry called the Baptist Student Union. I was a vice president of outreach. Emily was a vice president of something, I can't remember. But we knew of each other. We went on mission trips together. We served in ministry together. And so I knew of her, but it really took me a couple of years before I really started to notice who she was. And I really started to think about her as more than just somebody I wanted to do ministry with, but hey, this girl loves Jesus. She's beautiful. I want to know her. And so I waited because I'm thick-headed and maybe I was a little scared and intimidated. I waited years for an opportunity to ask Emily on a date. So late that literally, this isn't even a joke, I waited to the last possible moment that I had with Emily to ask her on a date. I waited until our senior year, the very end of the semester during finals, and the only reason I probably made a move to do it then was I knew that she was about to leave, graduate, and go off to do a short-term mission trip somewhere, and I'm thinking, it's now or never. I've waited years for this and thinking I would have opportunities, and I've blown it. And here's the moment of my opportunity. It was a study break that the Baptist Student Union held during finals week at like midnight. It was only like a 20-minute kind of a gathering where we came together and had deer chili. And then so you got a little bit of food, and then you went back to wherever hole you were in to go do studying. And this is the moment where I was like, it's now or never. I got to ask her out on a date now or I'm going to miss my chance. And so all of the weeks and days leading up to this moment, me and my roommates are planning it. We're like, oh, hey, here's what you can do. Here's what the date will be. Here's what you can use as your opening line. I mean, we're crafting this, building it all up, a big deal. I didn't even think to plan through whether she was actually going to be at this study break. I didn't think that far ahead. Now, here's the thing. I do all of this planning, and as you would know it, totally unlike me. I usually like to show up early to places. This date for the deer chili kind of study break is going to happen, and I'm running late. That's what I remember about this night. I'm running late to this thing. And so I'm going to have confession hour with you right now is that, man, as I'm making my way across campus, I wasn't just speeding to get to this thing. I was speeding to get to this thing. 20-mile-an-hour campus speed limit. It wasn't the kind of speeding where they pull you over and they give you a ticket. It's the kind of that they take your car and your license and you just go to jail or something. I'm that kind of speeding. I'm trying to make my way to this one opportunity I have to ask this one girl out that I am just enamored with and I think is the most godly woman ever, and I've built this moment up. And so I get pulled over on the way to this study break that's only going to last for 20 minutes. Matter of fact, I was driving so fast that technically I didn't get pulled over. I got where I was going and didn't even realize the cop was after me. I get out of my car, he's parked right next to me, and I remember asking him, I'm like, hey, did you pull me over? And he's like all exasperated and upset. He should have been. I'm way over the speed limit, and I remember him being like, dude, where are you going, man? Here's the thing, is that in that moment I'm thinking it's all over. I've blown it. I've blown it. This is easily going to take 20 minutes. It'll all be over. Study break's over. I've lost my shot. No good. But in God's providence, we joke about it, but I look at so many things that worked out. I look at our relationship and our marriage, and obviously you can see how it worked out. We have kids and we have a relationship today, but so many things worked out in God's providence for that to be able to happen in spite of me so often. But I remember thinking it's all over, but this cop looked at me, and in like 5 seconds, where normally they would have given me a ticket, he's just like, hey man, slow down. I'm like, awesome. And I made my way, and wouldn't you know it, the perfect time, and thank goodness I got pulled over because it delayed me apparently at just the right moment so that I remember standing at the chili pot, and who was right across the chili pot from me? It was Emily. I'm like, yes, perfect. I could have got here earlier and missed it. I could have been filling out all this ticket stuff and missed it, but God in His providence allowed me to have this moment at the chili pot where it all worked out, and we're 2 kids, and 15 years later, God's providence is good. And we see that. I know it's a joke, but I think about that as I come to chapter 3, and I think of all the twists and turns that we see leading up to this. But all the twists and turns we see with this couple and how they came together, and think, man, only God could work this out. Only God could make this kind of a thing happen. And for all the twists and turns that would happen in our lives, look at this situation, and it is unbelievably difficult. I mean, the only hope that Naomi and Ruth have at this point is that somebody, a man, a husband, will take an interest in her and marry and restore their name and make provision for them and have a life. But you know what? Ruth is not a normal kind of a person. She is young. She is a foreigner. She is poor. She's not just a foreigner. She's a Moabite foreigner. It's one thing to be an outsider in an insider's world, but these Moabites had been banned from the Hebrew people because they had led the Hebrew men astray. There's nothing good in it. I remember reading a pastor, he says, a commentary by Ian Duguid, he says, what is she going to do? Was she going to put a personal ad in the Bethlehem Times? Widowed, Moabite foreigner, seeking good-looking, hard-working, God-fearing man of character for long walks in the barley fields and quiet chats by the fireside. Must want and like children. It's not going to work out. Not only were they an odd match and did they have all the obstacles stacked against them, what we read and we see that Ruth did in this story is unheard of. I mean, it's not just that you had a woman who was proposing to a man. That's odd in this day and age. It's more than that. I mean, it would have been super odd in these ancient times. But she was a young woman proposing to an old man. Like we said before, she was a foreigner proposing to an Israelite. She was an employee proposing to her boss. I mean, the whole thing is just impossible. That's the word you think about. When I read the situation that they found them in, it's impossible. Not only is it impossible, but then the situation that they find themselves in, not only is that proposal happening, but it's happening in the middle of the night on the threshing floor in secret. That's the scene. I think we begin to see a truth, and we're going to come back to this in our application part, but let me just tell you the first kind of truth that we notice in here is that God likes to. Let me just tell you this. This is your story this morning. I don't know what impossible things are going on in your life right now. I know the last year has been a year of twists and turns. It is a year of unexpected things. It has been a year of negative, unexpected things. It's been a year of financial loss for people. It's been a year of job loss for people. It's been the year of tension with your marriage, tension with your children, tension with school, tension with politics, tension with the news, difficulty, trial, opposition, despondency, cynicism, apathy. I got to believe that there's people in my life where you'd say, put all those together and that's me. Let me tell you a truth that we learn in Ruth. It's a truth that we've been learning over these first 2 weeks as we've been looking at Naomi, who has now gotten spiritual amnesia and has become a spiritual couch potato, who has lost sight of her God, who has lost sight of her faith, who cannot see Him working in the midst of things, cannot see it because she's not expecting it. She doesn't like the way things are going. She cannot see that God is working in His goodness and His kindness. Let me tell you the first truth that we need to be reminded of again and over and over and over today, in spite of everything that's happening in your life. God likes to and routinely works in our situations in ways that are different than how you would choose to have them work out. And here's the good news. He routinely does that, and it's always better than what you would pick. I mean, if we learn anything from history, when man has a problem, God does solve it. Rarely does He ever solve it the way man wants. People of God are running away because they've got captors who want to kill them after they've been freed. I mean, they ask to be freed from slavery, and God does that in the most bizarre ways, plagues and things. And then when they get out there, they're being chased, and they come to a body of water. They got a problem. We're going to get killed. We got a body of water. God, we need your help saving. I bet there wasn't a single person there in that crowd that had been like, yeah, I bet He was going to part the water, and we walked through it. We go on and on and on. We'll get to the ultimate. I'll go ahead and give you the ultimate point of all of Ruth and all of Scripture is that we have a problem. This is what we're going to learn from Ruth. I got a problem with my sin. And God has an answer, but nobody thought it was going to come like this. Hey, I'll become one of you, let you spit on me, mock me, beat me, hang me on a cross, and I'll take your sin and you can have my righteousness. God is working always. Let me tell you something this morning. If you don't hear me say anything else, if you want this bumper sticker to tape home and put it on the back of your car so you can remember it right now in the midst of whatever you're going through, your celebration, your sorrow, your trial, or your triumph, let me tell you something. God is working. And let me tell you something, brothers and sisters in the Lord, for anybody that calls on the name of Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, He's working for His glory, but for your good. It may not seem like it. And the only way you're going to know that, and we're about to see the second principle show up here even in Ruth chapter 3. The only way you're going to know that and not have spiritual amnesia to forget it is that you are going to have to be a person who has faith. Faith to be able to see things that people can't see with worldly eyes. I love it. There was a pastor, Ray Pritchard, he wrote a sermon on the same chapter, and he says, one thing we learn about God is that with Him, anything can happen, and anything happens all the time with God. That's true of cops that let you off of speeding tickets when you're about to eat chili, and for Moabite women who are on the threshing floor. Anything happens all the time with God. Look at chapter 3 and we start asking ourselves a question. Who in the world? There's a massive obstacle here for Naomi and Ruth. Ruth has been stepping out on faith the whole time. Naomi, for the first chapter and a half and 2 chapters, has been sitting here and thinking, who is going to take a chance on Ruth? Nobody. That's the difference in faith and no faith. You've got Naomi who's saying, no, I'm going to sit over here on my couch and weep, and I can't see past my own grief and sorrow and apathy and cynicism. Nobody's going to take a chance on us. Ruth shouldn't have took a chance on me. I tried to talk her out of it. She should have stayed there and had rest in Moab with her own gods and her own people, but she stepped out on faith and came with me, so I feel bad about this. And you got Ruth over here who's saying, look, I see that there's an obstacle. I don't know who would take a chance on me. I don't know what man in his right mind would even give me a second look. But the difference is, I may not know all the answers and there's a lot of obstacles, but hey, we're just going to move ahead. I'm just going to keep moving. That's the difference in faith and no faith. This is the question we're asking as we come to Ruth chapter 3. Who in the world? Well, look, Naomi's coming around. What do we see at the end of chapter 2 is Naomi's beginning to have the fogginess of her eyes lifted. All of a sudden, she's starting to see things like Ruth saw it. All of a sudden, I can see God's goodness. Oh, wait a minute. He is working. Look at all these things that I was missing with my spiritual amnesia that caused me to be angry at God. All of a sudden now, hope. What does she now have? Her eyes are open to the hope that God has not abandoned her, is not working against her, but quite the opposite. And let me tell you what hope does for a person when your faith grows and when you have this hope that's put at the feet of God who is in control of all things. You start to see His goodness and His kindness and His providence in your situation. Here's what it'll cause you to do. It'll create activity. Now we see Naomi who's getting active. She's able to see that God hasn't abandoned her. And what does it cause her to do? Work. It causes her to think. It causes her to plan. It causes her to strategize. Let me tell you what sin will do. Sin will cause you to withdraw from God. That's what it'll cause you to do. Sin is, if we were to put it in its simplest form, it's just simply already a decision to turn our backs on God. It is a decision to turn our back on what is best. It is a decision to turn our back on His righteousness. And it will cause us to continue to walk away from God. And certainly in the midst of our difficulty, in the midst of a difficult time, it'll cause us to be blinded and oppressed by our depression and our bitterness. And let me tell you what happens is that we have an enemy who's prowling around like a roaring lion, and he loves to use that. He would love to wield our sin like a tool in order to stop us. That's what he wants to do. The enemy wants to kill us. He wants to destroy us. But as a church, he would love for us, in the midst of our sin, in the midst of our difficulty, in the midst of our trial, you know what he would love to do? He would love to wield that in such a way that we put our attention on our difficulty, on the things of this world, on our sin. He will use whatever he can. He will use whatever temptation he can to take our eyes off of the author and perfecter of our faith, the source and finisher of our faith, and have us put it on everything else. And let me tell you something so that this isn't just a Ruth 3 thing. That is what he's doing right now in the church. He would love for us to stop stop giving him glory. It's what we were created to do. He would love for you to stop being a person who lives their life like 1 Thessalonians 5 with an attitude of gratitude. I want you to stop sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with people. I want you to stop glorifying His name. I want you to stop giving Him thanks. And if He can stop us dead in His tracks, He will. And so often I think what He'll do is use our sin to take our vision off of Jesus. And when we take our attention off of Jesus, let me tell you what, we'll either stop or wander so far away from Him, we'll have spiritual amnesia. So what's happening here? Naomi, though, is coming back. I think what Ruth and Naomi do for one another is they help each other hope. Hopeful Christians move and plan and work and step out on faith, and they realize that nothing is ever lost. A person who is living in faith realizes that with God anything can happen. I think of Luke 1:37. Literally, God says this when he says, you know what, if I can let this old lady Elizabeth have a baby in her old age, the very next verse there, Luke 1:37, he says, nothing is impossible with God. This is what they're discovering here in in Ruth 3. Let me tell you something about your day today. God's the same. He's the same in the Old Testament. He's the same today. He will be the same forevermore. And nothing is impossible for Him. So whatever wall's in front of you, we keep moving forward. Even if I don't know how we're making it through or over or around, but I know this, He does. It's what the prophet Isaiah said. His ways are higher than your ways, and His thoughts are better than your ways. And I may not know what His ways are, but I know that I can trust Him, and I can step out on faith and do that. And we begin to see those things. We begin to see this activity, this faith activity happening now with Naomi and Ruth. It shows up in a very weird way. That's what we see here in chapter 3. Naomi's plan is weird. That's the best I can say about it. She turns into, with this activity and this newfound hope, realizing that God can make a way where it seems like there's a ton of obstacles, she turns into a matchmaker. That's what she turns into. Her goal is to find Ruth a husband. And by finding Ruth a husband, secure a future and find rest, as she mentioned in verse 3, and restore a lost family. Her target is Boaz. We got to find a man. And there's a lot of characteristics that would make Boaz a good choice. Number one, like verse 1 says of chapter 2, what was Boaz? He was a worthy man. And let me tell you what, that was rare in the time of the judges. There weren't a lot of godly men of character, worthy men in the time of the judges. The reason why we have the time of the judges is because God's people, God's men had turned their backs on him. But here is one. And not only was he a worthy man, according to verse 1 of chapter 2, I'll remind you what else he was specifically. He was of the clan of Elimelech. That was another good checkbox for why we need to focus on Boaz. Not only was he a good, godly man of character, was a worthy man, he, by the way, happened to be, if you remember those words from last week, it just happened to be, not accidental, not coincidental, God is a God of providence, a part of their family, a kinsman redeemer, as Carrie reminded us, because of the law of the Pentateuch that God put in place long before Ruth chapter 3, just happened to be one of these people who had an obligation, a responsibility, and a privilege to help a family member who was in danger or need, to marry them and give them new family and bear children through them. It just happened to be that he was one of them. This very field that she just happened to find herself in, boom. He had other check marks going for him. He already had shown interest in Ruth. That's a check box. Let's find the guy who has shown some abnormal, unbelievable interest in a person that he shouldn't show any interest in, for all kinds of reasons. Boaz is showing interest in somebody who's not even close to his age, a foreigner, an outcast who apparently was good for not much other than being worried about somebody abusing them, an employee. I mean, by showing her any interest, he might have been inviting shame and social outcast upon himself and his own family. This is who they now target. And here's the plan. That actually all makes sense. Oh, that's the part of the plan that we look at and we think, he seems like good marriage material. All of this is not abnormal and weird. What's weird is the way that she goes about trying to hook these two up. Much weirder than deer chili by the way, just to fill in the blanks so you know what kind of non-romantic person I am, the big date that I planned over this deer chili was to go play Frisbee golf. I invited Emily to go play Frisbee golf. I think it's a bigger miracle, not that I made it to the deer chili, but that she said yes to that. Here's our big date. Let's go throw a Frisbee in the woods in Baton Rouge. And that didn't go well. And all I'm saying is this is weird. Look at how she concocts this proposal. Seems like the normal thing would have been like, here's what we're going to do. Maybe go flirt. Pay some compliments. Work really hard. No. It's not that easy. Flirting isn't going to work. You can't just, if you're Ruth here, walk up and get on one knee and say, marry me, you hunk. It's not going to work like that. Matter of fact, time had passed. I think they probably had come up with this scheme because if we were to look at this, I would imagine at least 4 weeks, if not 6 weeks or 8 weeks, because you can tell by the harvest schedule here. They've now moved on from the reaping season to the winnowing season. That was at least 4 weeks, if not 2 months have gone by. And maybe they're thinking, you know what, this guy showed you interest and you blew it. He was telling you in verse 11 and 12 of chapter 2 that, you know what, you're a person of noble character. You left all that you knew. You left your family, and you have now found shelter in the wings of God. That might have been the moment for you to turn on the charm. That might have been the moment for you to be like, yes, and what about being a redeemer? You want to help me out? You've let 2 months go by. We got to resort to some different measures. And so she becomes the matchmaker. And let's just read it again. Here's the plan. This is the weird part. Look at verse 3. She says this. Now, what I want you to do is this. Wash up. Anoint yourself. Put perfume on. Put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. Do not make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. So you got to go down there in secret. And when he lies down, here comes the real weird part. And when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet. That means take his covers off of his feet. And then just lie down there. And when he wakes up, there you are. And just do whatever he says. Let me just tell you something. I put myself in Ruth's shoes. And this is a woman of faith. Because, we see that in the first 2 chapters. But by the time we come here, my mother-in-law tells me that. I'm like, nah. It's a short answer. Not going to happen. You had me at the wash up part and the perfume and maybe even the sneak down there kind of thing, but at the uncover the feet and just lay there in the dark on the threshing floor. The threshing floor wasn't even a building. It was like an outside raised flat bedrock part of a hill where they would have taken all of the barley and they would have either beaten it with a tool or had the cattle walk over it so it would have separated the chaff somewhat from the grain, and then they would have come in with the winnowing, which was to lift it up in the air and let the western winds blow the chaff away so that all you got left is the grain. And then they would sleep out there to guard it, because at this point you're either going to sell it or you're going to try to store it so you can keep it in your storage units. So you just got to go out there in the dark and do this. There would have been a point where this is insane. Not only is it insane, let me just tell you something that's weird about this. Number one, not only is it insane and is it weird, it was dangerous. She just said, yes, whatever you ask me to do, I'm going to do it. That's real faith. In Naomi, that's faith. So when she made that promise, I'm going to go where you go, and your people will be my people, and your God's going to be my God. That's real faith, because let me tell you what, it took real faith to do that. That's dangerous, number one. What do we know about this Moabite woman? She had a real threat in her life of being abused. Even Boaz recognized it. He told his own men, don't put a finger on her. Robbed, beaten, all kinds of abuse in there. That's in the daylight. I'm going to ask you to go out in the dark and make yourself look pretty. She goes out and she does this. Some would even say maybe it's not dangerous. I think some would make a case. I don't buy this, although it is plausible. Some would say maybe the scheme that they came up with was not only dangerous, but it was immoral. Some would look at it and say, what were they trying to do here? I don't understand what they were trying to do with this sleep in the middle of the night kind of thing. Why the middle of the night? There were some people who would say maybe what she was trying to do was say, you know what? He's never going to accept you. There's no man that's really going to ever accept you because you're an outsider, you're a Moabite, you're poor, or you're an outcast. So what we're going to do is, maybe some people would say, maybe what they were trying to do is entrap him. You go read on your own time. I'm going to save it just for our little ears in the room, but let me just tell you something. You go read what a common practice was. Go read Hosea 9:1, and you'll see the kind of women that would show up in the middle of the night to the threshing floor. That was their career. That's how they made money. Or some people would say maybe what we can do is maybe we'll tempt Boaz. He'll wake up in the middle of the night, it's dark, and he'll enter into a relationship where it's more like we caught you, we got you. Now you got to be our Redeemer. Let me tell you what, I think that's highly unlikely, and we're going to see that in a minute. I'm trying to ask and probe into this and unpack it. What was it that Naomi was trying to do? I think the most plausible and the most likely scenario, and we're going to see this in Scripture, is that it wasn't anything nefarious or evil or underhanded like that. I think what they're trying to do is simply create a super obvious invitation for Boaz to overcome whatever hesitation he might have in being interested to this young foreign Moabite that's working for him, and give him a clear invitation to fulfill a rightful role as a kinsman redeemer for their family. And let me just tell you what, whatever you believe about how the scheme went, here's what we know for sure, whether it's dangerous or immoral or whether they're just getting really creative here, there's a lot that could have gone wrong with this scenario. And Ruth still agrees. And that tells me a second principle we're going to come back to at the very end here in a couple of minutes is number one thing you got to respect about this. This all happened, and this incredible story takes place because Ruth and Naomi had enough faith to be strategic, to be active, to be out. It took faith. Whatever you want to say, you can call it naivety, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but I'm going to tell you what it took. They took a real risk. Those words are synonymous. I think we always use the word faith, but risk, faith, same thing. I think we look at our situation and we look at our obstacles. Let me tell you what. God is working. God is providential. And one thing that God is going to require of His people is the very thing that He's gifted us with, according to Ephesians. He's going to require that we step out on and have faith in Him. Amen. If you think that living in this world as a follower of Christ, no matter what your issue is, just pick it. If you think that's going to come by just ease and comfort with no kind of risk, think again. Here's the thing about this as we unpack it. I want to end with just some simple principles of how we apply this, because it really is only one thing that runs all the way through Ruth, but it's just good reminders for us. Number one, here's what we see that happen here. It worked. There's a lot of risk, and they stepped out on it, but you can say what you want. Here's the one thing that happened. Anything that happens with God so often, it happened here. It worked. Boaz, in the middle of the night, what did he do? His feet got cold. He reached down there to put his covers back over his feet, and in the dark, he saw a woman. And he asked the question that you and I would have asked, the simple question, who is this? I love her answer. And in verse 9, we see her answer. And in that answer, I think we get the answer for whether they were trying to do something evil or immoral. No. Look at her answer. She says this, I am Ruth, your servant. Here's the part I love. This next phrase tells me everything I need to know about her intentions there on that threshing floor at that night. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Let me just tell you, that may not mean a lot to you in this Hebrew language, and it may not mean a lot to you here in this Old Testament language, but if you were to go do a little study in Ezekiel, I believe Ezekiel 16:9, you'll see the same phrase, and it would have been the Hebrew equivalent of saying, here's an engagement ring. I'm making a proposal to you. This wasn't a one-night stand. This wasn't an entrapment. This wasn't to do what the women of the city were trying to do there on the threshing floor. No, her intentions were for marriage. Her intentions were for a relationship. It was for this redeemer relationship. She wanted him as a kinsman redeemer to do what he was allowed to do under the law. Take her into marriage and care for her. And let me tell you what, it took guts. It took risk. It took faith. It's crazy now. It would have been crazier in the ancient world. I love what we just see happening here. I love the response here. Boaz replies, I think maybe what motivated her to say, what I'm asking you to do is to spread your wings over your servant. And maybe I'm reading too much into the text, but I think about what Boaz had said to her. Why she caught his attention is because she had, listen to this, why was Boaz attracted to this girl? Because she had placed herself under the wings and the refuge of God. I think there was a part here, as I would hear other pastors say, they would say, maybe there was a part of this where Boaz was saying, because you put your trust and your refuge under the wings of God, I want to put my wings over you. It's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons I think we're attracted to our spouse. It's one of the reasons I was attracted to my wife. Yes, I thought she was pretty and I thought she was smart and funny, but let me tell you what, there was a part of her where I looked at her and said, this woman loves Jesus so much. I want to be around her. She'll help me know Jesus more. And so as we finish up just looking at the details of the story, I think we see that what we see even in that reply is that she wasn't a gold digger. Boaz noticed that. She could have chose somebody younger, richer, more capable of bearing children. She chose Boaz. It's like a Proverbs 31 kind of a thing. Even when there's obstacles here, Boaz starts scheming. He's got hope. He's got faith. He sees this. He starts scheming, even though there's a problem in verses 12 and 13, that there's another kinsman that could be nearer who has first dibs. I love what happens at the end of this story, by the way, so we can get to our application part. He looks at her and says, you know what? Hey, here's the deal. Now it's his turn to pursue her. She stepped out on faith and came down to the threshing floor and did what nobody probably else would do to take guts and stepped out on faith that God was going to make a way where it didn't seem like there was a way. And now that there's even an obstacle for Boaz, Boaz says, you know what? You wait here during the night. You leave before the morning comes up. Guess what? I'm going to go and I'm going to make this thing. I'm going to work this out with this kinsman. I'm about to go and make this thing all right. He even kind of gave her what I call a promissory note, a big one. Like, here's my intentions. I'm going to send you home with, when it talks about the amount of food that he gave her, that's 80 pounds, just fun fact for you there. He gave her 80 pounds. He said he put it on her. I mean, Ruth must have been pretty and smart and full of faith, and she must have been a hoss, man. I mean, she must have been strong. Here, I'm going to send you with 80 pounds of barley. I mean, and she's just like, okay, I'm gone. That's awesome. He says, but look, I ain't going anywhere. I'm going to go work this out. Just started pursuing. I'm going to go and work this out for us today. Last part of our story that I want to get to, and then just want to remind us of two simple things, really, and we're done. I even love it, like just even Naomi here, and Naomi's really coming around. It says that when she came back to her mother-in-law asked her, and I love this just because I like these kinds of translation things. Her mother-in-law asked her, hey, daughter, how did you fare? Actually, if you were to look at the real Hebrew, I think it's a lot simpler phrase than that. I think she asked her when she came in the original text, who are you? And she didn't ask her who you are because she didn't know it was Ruth. I think what she was asking her was, who are you? Are you still Ruth the Moabite? Or are you Ruth, Boaz's wife? Did it work? I mean, just see her sitting back at home thinking, oh, this is a crazy plan. I wonder if this is going to work. All their hopes are on this thing kind of working. And you look at a crazy story like that, and this is how I want to wind down. It's not a lot of application. There's not a lot. There's just simple, really poignant reminders that we get. Let me tell you what, there's a bunch of sermons you could preach here. You could talk about the importance of how we wait, initiative, stepping out on faith, working, moving forward. One thing that I think God put on my heart is that when I look at this, it's not just a cool story. It's not just an interesting love story. Again, I would remind you, the one point I want to remind us as we wind down. This is your story. It's my story. Can I help you understand something? When you read something like this, you are Ruth and Naomi in this story. Amen. You're Ruth and Naomi. And what do I mean by that? You're thinking, I don't get it. I'm not a Moabite. No, look, here's what you are. Broken. Needy. Let me tell you what Brad Kirby is without a redeemer. I'm poor. And I'm an outsider. Seemingly hopeless. How do people that are broken and hopeless and lost and outsiders find redemption? I think we see a couple just simple reminders, even from this story. We do two things, and this is what I want to talk about very quickly. We submit and we take a risk. You know, the truth is, this is a love story. It's not so much a love story between Ruth and Boaz. It's a love story between God and his lost people. A people like you and I who, with our sin, decided to walk away from him. That God's people, when he was in a covenant relationship with them, gave them everything in the garden, gave them a command. They decided because of their own sin, their own selfishness, their own disobedience, that they were going to break covenant with him. That they were going to do as Jeremiah said, sign a divorce covenant with God. And because he is love, like 1 John says, and because of his great love, he didn't throw us away. We're sitting at his feet and submit ourselves, and he didn't say, get out of here, you scuzzbucket. Get out of here. You broke it. Live with it. You're gone forever. No, here's what our gracious, steadfast in love God decided to do with us. Even though it is our sin and our disobedience that has created the separation, he made a way. He still made a way for us to not be broken, for us to be redeemed, to make it right again, all because of his love. There's no greater love story than that.